All right, hello and welcome back. In the previous section, we talked about energy balance in the form of calories. And in this section, we're going to be talking about the next level of the nutrition pyramid, macronutrients, and more specifically, proteins, carbohydrates, and dietary fat. So, only after energy balance has been understood and implemented can we move on to the next level of the pyramid. And so, that's exactly what we're going to do here. So, like I said earlier, energy balance is king. Whether we want to lose weight or gain weight, energy balance is what's going to make that happen. So, that needs to first be understood before moving into macronutrients, which are the things that actually make up those calories. So, macronutrients have calories, and protein has 4 calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram, and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. So, as you can see, fats have more than twice the amount of calories per gram or for the same amount of volume as protein and carbs. So, again, protein, carbs, fats, none of them are necessarily good or bad. They're all essential, just in the right amounts. And it's just important to be mindful that fat has 9 calories per gram, or it's a lot more calorically dense than proteins and carbohydrates. Alcohol or ethanol is also a source of energy, and it contains 7 calories per gram. However, though, it's not essential to your survival or performance, so we're not going to be setting a specific target for alcohol. So let's take this random nutrition label that I found on the internet, for example. So if we take each macronutrient and multiply its amount in grams by its corresponding caloric value, we can see how many calories each macronutrient has and how it relates to a nutrition label. But as you can see in this example, when we do the math, we only get 348 calories, not the labeled 350 calories. So why is that? Well, manufacturers can use different methods to calculate their macronutrients, and they're also allowed to do a bit of rounding to an even number, which is why you only see calories rounded to the nearest 0 or 5. So why even bring this up? One, so you can just be knowledgeable, when you're looking at a nutrition label, you can know if there's 4 grams of protein, that's 16 calories. But also to just point out that, if you're tracking macros and calories, it's most important to hit your macronutrient targets over your calorie targets. And this is just goes to show you that if you are hitting your macro targets, you're never going to be exactly spot on with your calories, and that's totally okay. So these 3 macronutrients make up all of our food for the most part, and they can affect many processes in our bodies, including our ability to digest our food and absorb nutrients. They can affect our hormone production, our immune system health, our cell structure and function, our body composition, our metabolic function, and much, much more. Proteins, carbs, and fats are called macronutrients because we need to consume a relatively large amount of them to meet our daily needs. And comparatively, we need a smaller amount of vitamins and minerals every day. So those are referred to as micronutrients, which we'll cover in the next section. Each macro has a different job, and a different distribution of macros is what makes diets different. So, for example, a ketogenic diet has a high level of fat, a moderate level of protein, and a very low level of carbohydrates. In terms of weight loss, any of these macro distributions or any other diet for that matter would lose weight under one condition: that calories were set to be in a caloric deficit. So, when talking about weight loss, keto diets work when you're in a caloric deficit. Vegan diets work when you're in a caloric deficit. A gummy bear and hot dog diet works when you're in a caloric deficit. So, but I know you care about more than just weight loss, right? You also probably want some nice muscle tone. You probably also want to get a bit stronger and just be more capable. You also probably want to feel good, take a solid poop every day, sleep well, and overall just be a healthy, happy human being. So that's why it's not only important to pay attention to how much you eat in terms of calories, but what you eat too in terms of macronutrients in this case. And that's why it's important to pay attention to these macros. So, if we're looking at these graphs here, they all add up to 100%, meaning that these are just different distributions of protein, carbs, and fats. On the left, we have the high fat or the, kind of a ketogenic diet. In the middle, we have a high carb diet. And on the right, we have a high protein diet. So again, in terms of diet, these would all work, again, if calories are set in a deficit. But like I said at the beginning of this slide is, each macronutrient has a different job. So let's take a deeper look at each macronutrient, starting with protein. So protein builds things in the body. It's structural in that sense. So when protein is consumed, it's broken down into amino acids, and it ends up in our body's amino acid pool. We can't store proteins like we can store carbohydrates and dietary fat, which means that protein is essential and we need a constant supply of it, which is why we are always, which is why we're talking about it first. It's really crucial to our diet, and I believe most people probably aren't getting enough protein, especially those wanting to lose weight and gain muscle. So the amino acids that make up the protein in our diet are responsible for things like being a fundamental building block of bones, muscle, cartilage, organs, skin, blood, hair, and even nails. It also is responsible for giving our body structure and building strength. It helps in making many hormones and cell signaling molecules, making more enzymes, making immune system chemicals such as immunoglobulins and antibodies, making transport proteins, and many, many more things. So when you're thinking about meals or setting up a meal or diet plan, I think it's important to think with protein in mind, meaning you're sort of starting with a protein and building your meal around that. So for breakfast, that might be eggs, as your main protein source that you're building around. And then you could add in some vegetables, maybe some fruit, maybe a piece of toast. Lunches and dinner, you've heard the chicken, rice, and broccoli, right? The chicken, rice, and broccoli diet. So you're starting with chicken, kind of building around that protein, and then adding in some vegetables with the broccoli and getting a carbohydrate source there with the rice. So protein, how much of it do you need? While this question is fairly individual and it depends on your goals, there are some general recommendations that make for a really good starting point. So my general rule of thumb is 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass, since body fat doesn't require large amounts of protein. So for an individual weighing 200 pounds and is about 10% body fat, they would have about 180 pounds of lean body mass. And so that would translate to about 144 to 180 grams of protein per day. Now, there are different scenarios where this number might be higher or lower. For instance, in a dieting phase or when you're in a caloric deficit focusing on fat loss, it might make more sense to increase protein in an attempt to preserve lean muscle mass. And in a gaining phase where you're focusing on gaining weight, primarily muscle, it might make more sense to decrease protein and increase your carbohydrates to enhance your training performance. But gram for gram, protein is the most satiating or filling macronutrient, which can indirectly help fat loss by making it easier to stick to a calorie-restricted diet. And protein also has the highest thermic effect, which means our bodies burn more calories digesting protein than it does with carbohydrates or fats. So here are some protein sources. These are all, for the most part, animal or dairy-based protein sources. So in the left-hand column, these are going to be your lean protein sources, and this is primarily where you're going to want to pick your protein sources from, and then also sprinkling in some of the fattier protein sources, which are in the right-hand column. So if you want to go ahead and pause the screen here and just take a look at some of these protein sources, go ahead and feel free to do so. But these are just some starting points to kind of get your mind going with some protein sources. And on this screen here, we have some plant-based protein sources. If you're following a vegan or vegetarian-based diet, or just looking for some more plant-based protein options. So the next macronutrient that we're going to dive into and take a deeper look at will be dietary fats. The main role of dietary fat is to provide energy to our bodies, which it is well equipped to do. So if you remember from some earlier slides, dietary fat has 9 calories per gram, which is more than twice the calories for the same amount of protein or carbohydrates. And dietary fat has kind of 6 major roles. It provides us with energy. In fact, it's the most energy-dense macronutrient. It helps make and balance hormones, particularly our steroid hormones, such as sex hormones and corticosteroid hormones. It forms our cell membranes. It also forms our brains and our nervous systems. It helps to transport fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K. And it also gives us 2 fatty acids that we can't make on our own, so we must get it through our diet. And that is linoleic acid, also known as an omega-6 fatty acid, and also linolenic acid, which is known as omega-3 fatty acids. And how much dietary fat do we need? Well, this question is, again, you guessed it, highly individual. And hopefully by now you're starting to realize a pattern here that, nutrition, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everyone's going to have different dietary needs. And your own diet will even vary over time depending on things like age, life changes, activity levels, sickness, and just your health and fitness goals. That being said, though, there is sort of a baseline amount of dietary fat that we need in order to maintain vital functions. So fats should account for anywhere between 15 and 45% of your total daily calories, again, depending on your macronutrient preferences as well as your goals. So if you prefer fattier foods like steak, eggs, avocados, nuts, etc., then you'll want to lean towards the higher end of that spectrum. But if you prefer more carbohydrates in your diet, like rice, potatoes, fruit, pasta, breads, stuff like that, then you're going to want to stick to the lower end. But kind of the minimum amount of dietary fat that should be consumed each day is 0.25 grams per pound of body weight. As far as fat types, there are 3 major fat categories: saturated fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids. And most fat-rich foods contain some combination of all 3 types of fatty acids, but typically they're higher in one type over the other. Fat sources that are high in saturated fatty acids include animal products like meat, egg yolks, and dairy fats. Coconut oil is also really high in saturated fatty acids and is one of the few plant sources in this category. Saturated fatty acids definitely get a bad reputation due to some studies that have associated them with an increased risk of heart disease. However, if you practice a regular exercise schedule, you're controlling your calorie intake and balance your other fats, these risks are actually pretty minimal. And it'd actually be very difficult to completely eliminate saturated fatty acids from your diet, as they're found in many foods, especially those ones that are high in protein, which we know is really important. Fat sources that are high in monounsaturated fatty acids are various types of meat, olive oil, and the oil in avocados, nuts, and seeds. Most health organizations label monounsaturated fatty acids as healthy fats, and research suggests that they may help lower LDL cholesterol, or also known as the bad cholesterol. So monounsaturated fatty acids should make up most of your total fat intake, as sources like nuts and oils are easy to add to your meals. So there are two main types of polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-3s and omega-6s. And unlike the other fats we have covered already, these two types of fat are essential, meaning we must get them from our diet because our bodies cannot produce them on our own. And most people consume enough omega-6, in fact, usually too much, but actually have a harder time getting enough omega-3 into their diets from whole food sources. So omega-6 can include stuff like seed oils, like safflower, sunflower, corn, and sesame, to name a few, and can be found in a lot of processed foods. Um, Salmon is especially high in omega-3, but any fish oil supplement is a good kind of insurance policy to make sure that you're getting enough omega-3 in your diet. And omega-3 has been proven to help reduce the risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and several other negative health outcomes, as it acts as a natural anti-inflammatory. And so there's actually one more type of fat that I want to talk about, and that is trans fatty acids. And these are man-made artificial fats found almost exclusively in processed foods to extend their shelf life. So trans fatty acids have no associated health benefits, and you should keep your intake to a minimum and look out for the terms partially hydrogenated and trans fatty acids on nutrition labels, as that means that there's going to be tons of trans fatty acids in there. I just kind of liked this picture here because it was sort of the epitome of processed food, a burger with bacon and a donut for the bun. So here we have a list of dietary fat sources. So if you want to pause the screen here to take a screenshot or write down some of fat sources you want to start incorporating in your own diet, go ahead and feel free to do so. All right, and last but definitely not least on our list of macronutrients, we have carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the body's fastest acting macronutrient source for energy, especially during high intensity exercise such as resistance training. And our bodies break down carbohydrates into its simplest form, glucose, which our body needs a constant supply of just to keep all the processes in our bodies running. And since we as humans can't make our own glucose, we must get it from our diet. And the easiest way to do that is through the form of carbohydrates. So in terms of how many carbohydrates you might need, that amount of carbohydrates, it's going to vary for each person and be highly individual depending on factors such as how big or small someone is, how much lean body mass or fat mass someone has, how active they are, how intense, long-lasting, and frequent that activity is, how old they are, kind of what stage in life they're in, what the intake levels of the other macronutrients are, their genetics, and ultimately what that person's goals are. But that being said, carbs should account for anywhere between 30 and 60% of your total daily calories, with a minimum kind of being around 0.5 grams per pound of body weight per day. So not all carbohydrates are created equally, and there's kind of two major types of carbohydrates: complex carbs and simple carbs. So complex carbohydrates that come from whole food sources like vegetables, fruits, beans, and legumes, and whole grains tend to keep us feeling fuller for longer. And they also travel with passengers like micronutrients, phytonutrients, fiber, and water. Perhaps even some protein and healthy fats in there as well. So, they keep our blood sugar and insulin levels stable, and they release their energy gradually instead of kind of all at once. Simple, refined, and highly processed carbohydrates, on the other hand, they digest really quickly but tend to leave us feeling kind of unsatisfied. They've been stripped of their other nutrients, and their passengers are often high amounts of sodium, along with industrial chemicals such as flavorings, trans fats, or preservatives. They stimulate our appetite and leave us wanting more, and they can cause fluctuations in our blood sugar and insulin levels. So in general, we should try to eat mostly complex carbohydrates from whole food sources. However, sometimes simple, fast digesting carbohydrates can be useful for special situations, like athletes who need quick replenishment during long workouts, or people who are having a hard time gaining weight and need easy calories in addition to the whole foods they're consistently eating. But, the bottom line is eat carbs appropriately for the activity you're about to do. So if you have a day full of meetings where you'll be sitting all day long, go for the fibrous complex carbohydrates. And if you're about to go for an intense workout, like doing some weightlifting, that'll have you huffing and puffing, then fast digesting simple carbohydrates might be more appropriate. So, fiber is a carbohydrate, but it is not digestible. Fiber is found in lots of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, which is another reason to incorporate a diet filled with a wide variety of whole, minimally processed foods. Our gut bacteria ferments fiber and produce short chain fatty acids, which have been shown to provide various health benefits and can help us with things like feeling fuller for longer, lowering our blood lipids and cholesterol, lowering our risk of colon cancer, keeping things moving through our GI tract, and boosting our overall gut health. So, a good starting point for fiber intake is 25 grams a day for women and 38 grams a day for men. But if you have a history of digestion or gut issues, take a more moderate approach and ease into your fiber intake. And so, just as we did for protein and fats, here's your carbohydrate sources list. And for the most part, you want to focus on the first two columns, the non starchy vegetables, um, as well as the fruit column. So, there you have it. Those are the three macronutrients. And let's just take a look here at the big picture. So, protein, what does it do? It builds things, it's necessary for recovery and muscle growth. Fat is the most dense energy source, and it also helps create some hormones. Carbohydrates are used for a fast acting energy source, like high intensity training and that kind of stuff. So that's macronutrients. That's level 2. Next up in the nutrition presentations here, we're going to be diving into level 3, which is micronutrients. I'll see you guys there.